Okay, sorry about that. The game just decided to crash since I am on console. Sometimes this Titan Quest game just crashes absolutely randomly. It doesn't make any sense. But we're gonna keep going. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Hopefully, the developers of either this game or the people at Sony stop smoking stale crack, and they will fix these issues because they are very frustrating. Sorry about that.
Words are also a feminine attribute. They are a feminine characteristic. They can be associated to the feminine nature of reality because they're waves, they're frequencies. So the left brain is associated with the masculine component, whereas the right brain is associated with the feminine component. But if we also take a look at the triune brain, we can look at it this way, that the R complex is associated to the masculine component, which is mostly connected to the left brain, and then the limbic system is associated with the feminine component because it's about emotions, which is mostly connected to the right brain. But the next section of the brain is the neocortex, or the telencephalon is what it's called. And this in Latin means new. So this is the new cortex. Neo means new, which can be correlated to Neo from the Matrix. And Neo is also an anagram for the word one. So this does have to do with unity consciousness. And there's a lot more we can break down about the movie The Matrix, which is an amazing allegory. And I'm sure that most people who are listening are very familiar with this movie. It also means bark or new rend. It means the new cortex or new bark or new rend of the brain. The neocortex of the brain has two hemispheres, the left and the right, which is separated by a unilateral fissure down the middle of the gray matter of the brain. This part of the brain is what makes us human. So it largely facilitates higher order thought functions, and it gives us our maximum cognitive abilities. It is what separates us from the animal kingdom by giving us the functions such as logic, reason, high in-depth language capability. It allows us to do art, it allows us to create music, and it gives us our ability of conscience when it is in proper working order. Let's take a look at the etymological definition of conscience here. So, conscience comes from Latin, the prefix con, meaning together, and scio, sciere, which means to know. So, it is in context of having knowledge. It's not just a gut or feeling, it is literal knowledge. And what is that knowledge of? It is the awareness of your actions being either correct, moral, or incorrect and immoral. So it is the ability to discern right action from wrong action. But it goes a little bit further than this. It is common sense knowledge between right action and wrong action. So the neocortex is what allows us to have the capacity to understand morality and the difference between what a right is and what it is not. I like to correlate the brain's functionality to Star Trek, specifically Next Generation, because that's one of my favorites personally. If we take a look at how the spaceship runs, the Enterprise functions, you have the engineer section at the base of the ship, which is where the warp core resides. This is the R complex of the brain. This is what makes movement possible in the spaceship and also what makes movement possible in the body. Then as we move up to the midsection of the ship, this will be correlated to the limbic system, which is where you find lodging, cafeteria, recreation, but also where study takes place, where people are reading and processing all the information that they have been taking in. And then one step further, we have the highest level, which is the neocortex, which I correlate to the bridge of the ship, which is where all the functions come together to actually make up the being or the enterprise. So this is where the higher level order thinking is taking place. This is where all the main functional crew members come together to cooperate to execute their mission and their journey. So the bridge is correlated to the neocortex. Let's say that we are attacked and the damage is located in the bridge of the spaceship. Well, then the functionalities of the spaceship revert back to more primitive or lower level sections of the ship. So this means that the functions might revert back into the engineer compartment or the reptilian compartment of the brain. So if our neocortex is damaged, our command function station will revert back to our basic survival instincts, being that of the R complex or the cerebellum. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a blunt force trauma to the bridge with the neocortex. It can just be an imbalance within the hemispheres of the brain. There are all sorts of weapons that are being waged against our brain and our biology daily. From the chemicals in the food, the water, the air, and even including radionic fields that are affecting the physiology of the being. This is how they destabilize the neocortex to put us in a survival mode. We are much more easy to control when we are in our animal modes of consciousness. So if we are in our limbic system of our brain or our cerebellum, the reptilian system of the brain, the mammalian or the reptilian, we can be controlled like herd animals. To understand more about how these weapons of manipulation affect our physiology, we have to take a look at the left hemisphere versus the right hemisphere of the neocortex. So the left side of the neocortex mostly facilitates analytical thought, logic, linear thoughts. It is associated to the yang energy. It is associated also with solar and matter, and this is directly because it is a masculine component of our consciousness. So it is the masculine side of our brain, and that's because of its functionalities. Being it thinks in linear modes, or it facilitates the linear thought process, so that's about straight lines. So this is just a simple way that we can look at it. Straight lines are a masculine component, archetypal. So that's why it is a masculine part of our consciousness. And it is not a coincidence that our brain evolved and developed this way. It is based off of the cymatic frequencies that are directing and governing the way our biology is taking form. We can associate this to the equilateral upward facing triangle, which we could call the blade. And that's also a masculine component because it is about piercing or thrusting. The right brain facilitates things like creativity, the emotions, intuitive thought processes. So in contrast to the left brain being matter, we have the right brain being connected with the spirit. It is symbolically associated with lunar aspects of our consciousness. This is because the moon is associated to feminine aspects. Mostly the reason why is because of how the moon affects the menstrual cycle of the females, and also how it affects the emotional sides of our consciousness. Since emotions are associated with the feminine, we can correspond this to the lunar aspects also, in contrast to the solar aspects, which is a more active attribute. So the left brain being associated with the sun has to do with it being more active, which is symbolically related to the sun. The left brain is the sacred masculine component of our consciousness, whereas the right brain is the sacred feminine components of our consciousness. Since the left brain has to do with activity, it is associated to self-defense also, which is one of the pillars of enlightenment. There are two pillars of enlightenment. One is the non-violent pillar, which is associated to the right brain. And the other is the self-defense pillar, which is associated to the left brain. One cannot consider themselves to be an enlightened being if they do not have enough self-care and self-respect to defend themselves. Self-defense is one of nature's oldest laws, and we ought not forget that. But going back to the right brain, it is also the yin energy. So we have the yin and the yang. And if you look at the yin-yang, the two dots on the yin-yang are a bird's eye view of these two pillars of consciousness. Obviously, it is supposed to represent a little bit of the light within the dark and a little bit of the dark within the light. And I completely agree with that association. And that is how our brain works too. There's a little bit of feminine within our left brain and a little bit of masculine within our right. So this is all just basic generalization when it comes to these correspondences within the brain. But without this understanding of how the brain works, we lack the knowledge and the understanding that's necessary to heighten ourselves and to create better things in reality. And we won't understand the issues that come about when we're in an imbalance, whether it be a chronic right brain imbalance or a chronic left brain imbalance. So the left brain tends to be more aggressive, the right brain tends to be more passive. The right brain is also symbolically associated to the inverted equilateral triangle, which we could call the chalice, because it is an open womb, or it is about openness. So the left brain is the assertive part of our consciousness, and the right brain helps us to take in information and assimilate information, to absorb, to be listeners rather than speakers. But like I was saying, it is of no coincidence that the left and right brain took form this way. Now, these are both interconnected through the corpus callosum, which is the great mediator. And if there is a imbalance between the left and the right parts of our neocortex, then we fall into what we could term master think or slave think, or slave think. So if a human being's left hemisphere becomes chronically dominant, the R complex of the brain will become the executive function of the brain. Emotions will become suppressed, and the person will become ruled by selfishness, egoism, base desires, survival, and develop a personality based in domination and control. And in contrast to that, if the right brain becomes dominant, if the human being's right brain hemisphere becomes chronically dominant, the limbic system will take over the executive function of the brain. Defense and survival instincts will become suppressed, and the person will be ruled by their emotions and develop a personality based on submissiveness and naivete. A good example of this is Stockholm Syndrome. The person with Stockholm Syndrome is in the slave thing, is in a imbalance within the hemispheres of the brain, which means that they are chronically within the right brain, and the left brain activities are being neglected and probably even atrophied because they've been in it for so long. So the corpus callosum helps the information to travel back and forth between the left and right hemispheres of the brain, and that's why it's called the great mediator. It is the bridging of the brain. And there's some symbolic knowledge to that also. If you look into Freemasonry, we can understand how important the archway is, or the bridge, is in Freemasonry. we understand that one of the strongest structures is the arch where two sides lean against each other, and then we have the keystone in the middle. So in trauma-based mind control techniques, one thing that they target is the corpus callosum. If they can damage the corpus callosum, then they can damage the ability to balance the left brain and the right brain together. And that's what we're trying to bring in. We're trying to bring in a state of non-duality between the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine components of our consciousness. Unfortunately, most people have an internal schism or battle going on between the way they think and the way they feel. They think one thing and they feel the exact opposite, or they feel one thing and they think the exact opposite. That is the sure sign that you have an imbalance going on. And it is our job to become conscious of that imbalance and to align our thoughts and emotions together to create the divine action, to create a healthier action or a more productive and moral action with our bodies on this plane of existence. Because what this really comes down to is that if we have a destabilized neocortex, we are less likely to create moral actions in society. And freedom and morality are directly proportional to each other. So the law of freedom is that as morality increases in any given society, freedom increases. And as morality declines in any given society, freedom declines. Now that's at the aggregate level of those societies. So as more actions that are manifested in a society destroy freedom, as more immoral actions are manifested, then there is less freedom in that society. And as there is less immoral actions manifested in a society, then there is more freedom. We can get into that here in the future because I know we're running out of time here. But just to re-emphasize on that a little bit, moving towards either extreme of either polarities of intellect or emotions can be a divisive force which holds us back from true care and right action. So we must engage our will and, really use the willpower to unite these polarizing forces. So we need knowledge, courage, willpower, and right action, in addition to true care, to really, make a change. And when this happens, when these parts become equally balanced to the best of our ability, we will get a higher state of consciousness, and that will reflect into the universe fractally also. We can correlate this to the Holy Trinity also. That the reptilian section of the brain can be related to the Father, and then the limbic system can be related to the Holy Spirit or the Mother, the Sacred Feminine, and then the neocortex can be the divine offspring, the divine child or son from that. So that's just another triune aspect of how we can look at this symbolically. And I feel that's really important when we're looking at, these threes and also looking at the way consciousness works, because there are only three aspects to consciousness. You have thoughts, emotions, and actions. And there's a reason for that, and we need to really, dive in and understand the simplicity of that. This isn't very complex. This is really basic stuff. Even children can come to understand this, and I think we should be teaching our kids about these things very, very early on, instead of waiting until, you get to college or whatever. You should be teaching your kids, consciously parenting your kids with this kind of knowledge. I'm going to go ahead and move on to our final topic, though. It does correlate to the brain, and it correlates to all forms and physical manifestation. It is what is known as cymatics, which I briefly mentioned earlier. The definition of cymatics is the governing dynamic of forms. So cymatics,
back when we were living in Marion, he was going by DJ Climax.
So if you look it up, you're going to find where they take these particles, these granular solids, and they put them on a plate, a glass plate or some type of plate, and then they vibrate that plate. Depending on the actual hertz, the frequency that's vibrated through the particles or the granular solids, they will take different shapes and different forms. And a lot of times, actually, I think most of the time, they take sacred geometrical shapes. So this really correlates back to geometry in the quadrivium when we understand that. And this is also about consciousness too, because that frequency is consciousness. So the reason why we see these biological forms taking shape this way, the reason why the brain is in three aspects, is because of cymatics. And there's these forms of sacred geometrical shapes that take hold within the mind, and we can even look at these as metaphysical forms that also take shape from frequencies. Also, so it's not just physical that it happens; it also happens metaphysically as well. But sacred geometry is a very beautiful thing and can be found in all the patterns of creation everywhere. And that means from our cells, of our DNA, they hold sacred geometrical patterns. Snowflakes is a great one. You know, the eyes have sacred geometrical patterns. Pine cones, flower petals, you know, branches of trees, they all hold what is known as fractal patterns. And cymatics is the root of fractals as well. So fractal theory is something that is self-similar uh, throughout scale. So I believe I said that correctly, but you can look that up. So fractals are very important when it comes to understanding cymatics. So cymatics is, you know, like I said, the governing dynamic of form. So frequencies govern the way forms take shape in our physical world, and like I said before, in our metaphysical world. So if you're wondering why we see all these beautiful, gorgeous patterns in nature, from a sunflower to the dendritic patterns of lightning, which is branching patterns of lightning, things like that, it's because of the vibration underneath that. And this study was pioneered by Dr. Hans Jenny, and they really started to bring this out in the early 1900s and really kind of revolutionized, you know, later on in like 1970s. And the word cymatics comes from Greek, and it's chi, and it's not with the C, it's with the K, because there are no C's in Greek. This is also where we get our word kymatica from. So there's a great documentary about cymatics or kymatica. It's called kymatica, so I would recommend that documentary also. But it refers to matter relating to waves and how waves govern the particles within matter to take shape. And I can reiterate that over and over and over. But that's basically what it is, you know, the cyclical nature and patterns, the intervals between the wave frequencies determine the way those shapes are formed in our minds and in physical reality. Now, make no mistake that the ancients did understand this science. So, in fact, it has been rediscovered and fine tuned in the past decade. But if you look back to the seven hermetic principles, you will find that this science was well understood and utilized in the ancient cultures of our world. One example of this is ancient forms of chants and mantras and synchronization between people who are singing certain vibratory tones that harmonize together to amplify the effect. Music is a great place to look when we're trying to look for the effects of cymatics, and that there are patterns that take place, there are forms that take place when you look at the vibrations that are, you know, being produced from musical expressions. And when they did a study, I think it was John Stuart Reid, who is an acoustical engineer in England, used cymatics and used the frequency of 432 hertz. He noticed that it created equilateral triangles. And I think that's very important because that's about balance. And we know that most music now is created with 440 hertz. And a little interesting history about 440 hertz. As early as 1885, the music commission of the Italian government declared that all instruments and orchestras should be using a speaker that vibrates at 440 hertz, which was different from the original standard of 435 hertz and the natural harmonics of 432 hertz used in France at the time. In 1917, the American Federation of Musicians endorsed the Italians followed by a further push for hertz in the 1940s. In 1953, a worldwide agreement was signed declaring that middle A on a piano be forevermore tuned to exactly 440 hertz. This frequency became the standard in the world for all musical instruments, based on the chromatic scale, the one most often used for music in the West. Now, a lot of people may be familiar with a lot of the mind control techniques that have come out from pop music and things like that, but 440 hertz is definitely part of that overarching plan. It is literally a war on consciousness. And this is because our natural vibratory tuning is 432. Now, I say that because 432 lines up with pi and the golden ratio, which also correlates to cymatics and fractal frequencies. So, this affects our consciousness. This is literally a war through vibration on our consciousness. Furthermore, 432 hertz resonates with 8 hertz, the Schumann resonance of the planet, which is the electrical magnetic beat of the Earth. So this also
18
tunes
came
us
this
back
way holding a
into
giant sickle.
Gaia
The
or
people
planet
who
Earth.
live up here,
Now we know by studying history that frequencies have been used to agitate
Man is
people's
naked.
consciousness for a
Jeez.
long time. The monopolization of the music industry
They're both naked.
features this imposed frequency that is herding populations into greater aggression, psychological agitation, and emotional distress, which also can directly affect the wellness and health of an individual's body because of the way that the cells are interacting, the way that the signals are interacting with the particles of the body. Going a little bit deeper, it is said that propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels insisted that 440 hertz tuning in Germany because he believed it made people think and feel in a specific way, making them a prisoner of a certain type of consciousness. A lot of people try to debunk this because of the way that the music makes them feel personally. But they fail to understand the science of cymatics when it comes to this. And when you actually use 440 hertz, you can see the direct effects in granular solids, like I was talking about earlier, which makes them less orderly and more chaotic. And this happens within the biology of being when we are submerged in that frequency constantly. And then just to add one more thing there, the equilateral triangles are integral to the flower of life, and it's integral to platonic solids. And platonic solids is something that we will talk about in the future because those are part of understanding cymatics and forms and archetypes and symbolism. And this is all just base information that one needs to have in their toolbox to really help not only themselves to come to an understanding about how this world works and how our internal workings work, but also to help enlighten other people who have not been educated into these. So we are water, and then we're also light, and light has to do with wave frequencies, and so does water. They're both really derived from a sacred feminine aspect of the
Taking the
universe.
pack out one by
And
one.
obviously, light
No,
is
I'm
mostly
here.
associated to the masculine aspects of the universe, and darkness, the feminine aspects. But what I mean here is the underlying wave frequency of light is associated to the feminine. All living things emit photons from their DNA. And this is something I found very profound. And these photons operate in the visible light spectrum from slightly off infrared to the ultraviolet. So DNA emits coherent light, and this is very similar to an extreme weak laser in a way when you're looking at the scans and stuff like that, looking into the science of it. So our DNA, the shape of our DNA, takes place because of the frequency that's being emitted through that, and that's also because of the light, that's also being emitted not only from that but also through that as well. So light has a big thing that plays into factor with cymatics. So sound is a sacred feminine component. So speaking is feminine. So yelling is feminine. Screaming, crying, having the emotions through the vocal cavity. using this tool is a sacred feminine aspect because it has to do with wave frequencies. Now, I want to clarify on that the act of speaking is a masculine activity or associated to the masculine component, but the wave frequency that is being emitted is a feminine attribute. That's because of the curve. The curve makes it an archetypal feminine, whereas a straight line would be an archetypal masculine symbolic association. But if we take a look at some of our other senses, we can see that listening is feminine. Smelling is obviously feminine, like smelling flowers, right? We know that's a very feminine trait for our consciousness. And listening obviously is taking in wave frequencies. So this is about being receptive, which is a feminine attribute of consciousness. But I think that's really important to understand that the right brain is a receptive aspect of consciousness, and the left brain is the logical, the reason part of that. And I wouldn't even say reason. I would say that true reason is the balance between the left and the right together. So the left brain is not just mainly reason. It's the unification of the left and right which makes reason happen. Because you have to have critical thinking and critical feeling. You can't just have critical thinking. Well, we always hear about critical thinking, but we never hear about critical feeling. Critical feeling is a really important part of our aspects of consciousness. So that's all we have time for today, folks. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to coming back on and bringing up more of these crucial and informative topics, hopefully to spread this knowledge wide and far to many like-minded people. Make sure to check out our website, CubbyWhole.com. That's CubbyWhole, for all the current updates, news, blogs, and episodes of the podcast. I hope that you all have a wonderful day.
All right, there you have it. That was a good, very good episode. Don't forget this weekend in Elkhart, if you're in the northern Indiana area, we have a comedy night. It's $10 a head. We're gonna have Jack Hole as one of the performers there amongst 3 other very talented comedians in the area. $10 gets you through the door. $5 if you're a member of the Michiana Education and Arts Club. So become a member. You get half off. And what else is going on? There's a punk rock show Saturday, but I'm not going to promote that because personally, I feel like I should be opening that show up instead of a bunch of femme boys. A bunch of soy boys are opening up that show, but the Foleys are going to be playing, so that's going to be awesome. Shout out to that. I'm going to get these Yetis are chasing me. All right. Hopefully it stopped raining so I could take out the DOGs so they can go potty. Squirt Dog needs his medicine. Getting chased by Yetis. I hope you stuck around. That was a very good episode. And I definitely, I need to sort out the files on the computer. That's something I need to do tonight. And I also need to sort out my inventory in Titan Quest. This is what, I'll show you what the computer looks like. This is what my computer looks like right now. Just a bunch of junk, bunch of chaos. I need to clear it out. All right. Like I said, thanks for sticking around. Make sure you get one of them CubbyWhole shirts. Become a member of Michiana Education and Arts Club if you're in the area, or even if you're not in the area. Support local music, support the local venue because, like I said, the pandemic shut down a lot of venues. A lot of local venues got torn apart. There weren't a whole lot of places to play during the scamdemic, besides Newcastle. The Riot Room in Newcastle, we just did an interview with those guys. Check out that interview. Very good people. The Marlows are absolute legends, just like Brandon and Nate Caff of CubbyWhole. All right. I'll see you tomorrow or whenever, next time. I don't know. I don't really have a consistent schedule as far as uploading these videos goes. But, all right. Thank you. Like, share, subscribe, comment, put your thoughts in below. Am I doing good? Should I just cancel these videos? Should I stop? Should I go jump off of a bridge? Let me know. Let me know, Internet. All right. Love you guys. Peace.